Hello, hello. Ooh. Okay, let's. Oh, there we go. The microphone's working. That's always helpful. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream this morning. We're probably going to have some little guests wandering through at some point. I thought it would be super helpful to have a bit of a chat about interfacing. What is interfacing? What is it all about? Now, I am going to just quickly make sure everyone on Discord knows we are actually live streaming on YouTube today and not Twitch. So bear with me just a moment while we wait for some people to jump in. How is everybody? Has everyone had a good weekend so far? I definitely have had a really busy week, and I'm very much looking forward to a little bit more of a chill day today. And tomorrow, going to be going to Dios de los Muertos celebration in Melbourne City, which is going to be all sorts of fun. So let's get some shares happening. Here we go. All right. Live on YouTube. Okay. Great. That's given a really cool thumbnail. All right. Let's see if we can drum up some people. Here we go. All right. Let's open Studio because we're getting a little bit of a warning. What's going on? All right. Well, we've got a little bit of the internet's a bit crap today, let's put it that way. And hello, my little sir. Hello. So if I do cut out, I do apologise. It's the internet in Australia, right? Every now and then it just does not do what we want it to do. All right, so let's get chatting about interfacing. What is interfacing all about? How do you use it? What are the differences? So I've got some notes today, so if I'm looking down a little bit, that's why. We're going to start with, obviously, what is interface. So pattern, it's going to tell you there are some parts that it wants you to interface. Some sewing patterns want you to interface the whole thing, particularly if you're making corsetry. That'll quite often suggest that interfacing the whole thing is a really good idea. So interfacing is basically an extra bit of fabric that you use to give structure to the fashion fabric that you are using, or even the lining that you're putting under your fashion fabric. It comes in various different forms, but it's essentially there to make your garment hold up a little bit better, look a little bit more professional. Now I'm wearing something that is completely uninterfaced, so I'd love to be able to show you what I mean. But I've got some really good examples here of different types of interfacing, what they are, what kind of things you would be using them for. So we're going to go through all of that, I promise you. There's definitely some misconceptions around interfacing and what it is and where you should buy it. And I want to dispel some of those myths as well, because you don't need to spend tons and tons of money on interfacing to have something that looks quite professional. Okay. So if we really just think about interfacing as being a structural layer, you don't have to go out and buy a fabric that is specifically called interfacing. You can use a lot of different fabrics as an interfacing, but if we're talking about the fabrics that are sold specifically for it first, that's where we're going to go first. And then at the end, I'll give you some suggestions for if you just don't have an interfacing, what could you use in that circumstance. So, pardon me, a little bit yawny this morning. I guess there are two different types of what we would think of as interfacing. So the specific fabrics or mediums that are sold to interface your clothing. There is fusible and non-fusible or sew-in interfacing, and those are the most two commonly sold types. And then they come in various different weights. So you can get a lightweight interfacing, a midweight interfacing, heavyweight interfacings, and they all do slightly different things. There's also non-woven, woven, and knit interfacing. So as you can tell from what I'm saying, there's a lot of different variation in there that makes some really big differences. I'm just going to close the door because I think Rod doesn't realize I'm streaming and he's playing something really loudly. So should you buy fusible or non-fusible, lightweight, medium weight, knit, woven, non-woven? What's the difference? Why would you buy which one, and what's the right choice for you? Well, that's a really great I can't speak this morning. It is a really great question, and it's going to depend on also what you're making. So let's start with sewable and or sew-in and fusible interfacing. So the difference between a sew-in interface and fusible interfacing is that a sew-in interfacing, kind of like this bit of fabric, it doesn't have any adhesive or anything on it. You just sew it onto the fabric that you're wanting to stabilize. So to give you an example of that, if we just had, here's a piece of cotton. We're just going to use, do you know what? Let's use this one. No, we're not going to use Disney anything. We don't want to get copyrighted. Here we go. My lovely long bit of fabric. Okay, so let's have a look at, this is just a piece of cotton drill, okay? So it's fairly fluid, moves really nicely. I'd call it a light to mid-weight, probably like on the mid-weight end of a lightweight fabric. So it's got a little bit of structure, but it's still quite movie. So this is just a quilting cotton, so it's a really nice quality cotton. And if we put a bit of interfacing behind it, what you would notice straight away is for this bit of fabric, you see how straight up, just with that sitting behind it, it's not falling as fluidly as this part of the fabric. It's got a little bit more structure, and it's going to make it stand out a little bit more than if we took that piece of interfacing away. Quite amazing how such a little bit of fabric can make such a difference, right? So a sew in interfacing, you would just cut out 2 pieces of the same pattern piece and then sew them together before you start sewing your garment together. Now, you can either put that sewing interfacing in your lining or attaching it to your fashion fabric. Sometimes your instructions will say to attach it to the fashion fabric, and sometimes it'll say to attach it to the lining. If you want to give more structure to the outside of the garment, look, honestly, it's going to depend on what you're making. I'm going to say follow the instructions of your sewing pattern until you get really familiar with interfacing and you know how you want your garment to react. So a sewing interfacing obviously takes a little bit more time. Well, potentially takes a little bit more time because you're double cutting everything out and then sewing it all together before you start sewing your garment. But it can give you a very, very lovely professional looking garment, which is where we're going to come to what does an iron-on interfacing look like? Well, an iron-on interfacing, that is not an iron-on interfacing. This one is though. So this is an iron-on interfacing. This is quite a heavy weight interfacing. What you'll notice when I turn that around, I hope you can see this, is that on the back it's a little bit shiny. I might even come over to the side here so I can get a little bit closer and show you that this has got a little bit of texture to the fabric. You can particularly see it down the bottom there, I guess. So an iron-on interfacing has an adhesive on one side of the fabric so that, again, you cut out the pattern twice and then onto the fabric. So if you're just making something quite small and you're going to be interfacing the entire garment, you have to interface the entire fabric. Now this is the same kind of fabric as the other fabric I was just holding up. It has a heavy weight or a mid to heavy weight fusible interfacing on it, and you can see that it's completely changed the structure. It's no longer fluid, it's quite stiff, and I use this to make a underbust corset or a waspy belt for a friend to go see Beetlejuice. So this, you can see that interfacing just gives it quite a bit more heft and something that is normally quite a lightweight fabric and a heavyweight fabric. So what would be our choice over going a sew-on or a fusible interfacing? I think sometimes there's this misconception that fusible interfacing is a better option because you don't have to sew it in, it's automatically there, you can just go. One little tricky part about a fusible interfacing is that the adhesive is temperature sensitive. You're going to be ironing it onto the piece of fabric and it does sometimes bubble. I have a really good example of this and show you. I made this really pretty purse and I lined it with a silk, and you can see that the silk is actually quite bubbly. And I wanted to give it a little bit more heft inside, and unfortunately in the process of giving it that heft, I didn't get the temperature quite right. And look, most people are never going to see this, right? Most people are just going to look at that and go, what a pretty purse. But you can see that wrinkling quite clearly. That's what you can get with a fusible interfacing. If it doesn't quite adhere properly, or if your interfacing is a little bit older and some of the adhesive has worn off, or there's lots of little bits and pieces that can affect your fusible interfacing. Let's put it that way. So fusible interfacing can be a very, very good option for something like a cotton, where you're not going to see that rippling as much, or a heavier linen or a suiting fabric. Sometimes it can be a really good option for that. I would avoid a fusible interfacing with lightweight satiny type fabrics. Anything sheer, there are interfacings you can get as well. But yeah, definitely don't be scared off by sewable interfacing. I actually don't think it takes any longer to do a sewable interfacing than it does a fusible interfacing, because whether you're sewing it in or you're ironing it in, you still have to take the time to make that happen. So where it comes to your lightweight fabrics, I'm going to say sewable is probably the better option. But you need to get comfortable with interfacing either way. Some garments are going to ask you to use a fusible interfacing, so give it a go. If you're using a lighter weight satiny fabric, I would recommend interfacing the lining and not the fashion fabric, because that lining is going to mean that if there is a little bit of bubbling, it's just going to be on the lining and not on the outside of the fabric. So it'll make sure that that outside fashion layer of your garment is going to look as professional as possible, even when you're making bags. Bags, typically, that's a whole other bucket. I'm not a bag expert, but interfacing the lining of a bag can give, if it's a really lightweight fabric on the outside, can give you a little bit better finish. But I know that, having read through some really good books about making bags, that you quite often will want to interface both sides. So if you are interested in making bags, by the way, I would highly recommend this book. So it's called The Better Bag Maker. It's by Nicole. I always say Nikki's surname wrong. What's really bad is I actually go in classes with Nikki, who wrote this book. I really should know her name at this point, but I always mispronounce her surname. So it's Nicole Melalou, and I'll leave a link to where you can buy this in the description of the video once I post it later. So really, really good book, which talks all about bag making. A little bit of a segue here. But if you really want to learn about interfacing, bag making, brilliant segue into it, because bag making definitely requires you to get very comfortable with interfacing various different types of fabrics. So we know the difference now between what is a sew-in interfacing and what is a fusible interfacing. And then we get to your non-woven, woven, and knit interfacings. So your non-woven is more where there's not really any grain. It's sort of a bonded fiber. So this one would be a non-woven interfacing. It's sort of an artificial fiber that's got more of a web texture. So when you look at this interfacing, you can tell that it's a polyester. It's pretty much just been made in a machine. So very, very thin layer of plastic rolled out in a machine. So that's a non-woven interfacing. Then we have our woven interfacing. Now, a woven interfacing is something like this. You can very clearly see the grain of the fabric with this interfacing. So this is what we would call now this is an iron-on woven interfacing. It very clearly has grain lines to it, but while it's a mid-weight interfacing, it's also got a little bit of flop to it. You know, it's got a bit of movement. So your woven is generally, sometimes they're made from a more natural fiber. I would also call this one a woven interfacing. You can quite heavily see the texture on this one. And then your knit interfacing is kind of like a knit fabric. It's where we've knit the fibers together. Now, I don't have any knit interfacing at the moment. I very rarely actually use it. It's where we've knitted the fibers together just like any other stretch fabric. So it'll give you more of, you know, just like any other knit fabric. It'll move for you in a knit garment. And I hear you saying, which is the best type? There isn't a best type. The best type of interfacing is the one that's going to suit the garment that you're making at the moment. So which one to use? But just understanding those basic differences between the types of interfacing can really help to give you a little bit more of an idea of what are you really looking for. And when we think about the garment we're making, like if you're making a woven garment, a non-woven or a woven interfacing, so not your knit interfacing, but a non-woven sort of non-stretch interfacing can be a really good idea. I'm sorry if I'm looking at the window and glaring. We've got a neighbour who just lets their cats roam wherever, and it's constantly in our yard, and it's in our yard at the moment, and it upsets our cats all the time, so it makes me grumpy. Anyway, back to the topic. So your woven and non-woven interfacing for woven garments is generally going to be the better option. Your knit interfacing and sometimes your non-woven interfacings are a good option for knit garments. It depends what part of the garment you're really trying to stabilize. And do you know what? I tell a lie. I do have a knit, what you would probably consider an interfacing in the other room, which is power mesh. So when you are making things like yoga pants and swimsuits and that sort of thing, it'll often call for power mesh, which is basically a stabilizing fabric that you put between your layers of your swimwear or the band around your yoga pants to sort of give it that little bit more structure in the areas you need it. If you're making yoga pants with a nice wide band because you want a bit of compression around your tummy to keep everything that's when a power mesh can come in super handy. And in that circumstance, pro tip, use 2 layers of power mesh. You'll get a much better compression. So now that we know that there are 3 different types of interfacing in terms of their structure, what kind of weight of interfacing are we choosing? Now, as you can tell by looking at this pile here and the rolls of fabric, there are many different types of interfacing. So let's start with this really sort of lightweight interfacing. What would we use this for? Well, I mean, the easy answer is a lighter weight garment. If you are making a garment that it needs a little bit of structure in some spots, but you still need a little bit of movement from that garment, you're going to want to use a lighter weight interfacing. If you're making something with a little bit more structure, like for example, a suit jacket, and you still want that suit jacket to move, but you need it to have that structured collar, or you're making a blouse for work or a shirt for work out of some nice cotton and you want to placket to really hold it structured nicely, you would use more of a mid-weight interfacing. Now this is a heavyweight interfacing, but something that's sort of halfway between these two. Your mid-weight interfacings are really good for button plackets, waistbands on structured pants. So, you know, like suit pants or just a skirt waistband, a medium weight interfacing is quite good for that. What you are going to be then looking at is the difference with your interfacings. So let's put it this way. This, as I mentioned before, is a mid-weight interfacing, but you can actually tell when we unravel it a little bit, it is actually quite drapey looking, a little bit like that cotton I was holding up before. This interfacing is what you would use for jackets. So you can put this interfacing in the collar of a jacket and it'll give a really nice structure, but it'll still move a little bit more. If I actually bought this interfacing to make a 1950s swing coat for my sister, for my friend Jo. I've made a few of them now. I even made one for myself, and this is what I actually put in the cuff, because the cuff from that jacket, while it's made of quite a heavy wool, the cuff needs a little bit more structure to hold itself in place, but not so much structure that it feels like you've got cardboard wrapped around your wrist. Hello, by the way, everyone, and just to sort of interrupt the conversation a little bit, if you've got some questions, please feel free to drop them in chat, and I can see the chat while we're talking, and I'll be able to answer those questions for you, okay? So the best place to look for me to tell you which interfacing should you buy structure-wise is going to be to look at your pattern. Now, to show you what some more heavyweight interfacings look like, this is one. You can see here, this thing really has no movement. Now, this is a fusible heavyweight interfacing. I use a lot of interfacing, so I have a lot of it on hand. This, I would say, is a more, now this is a non-woven, non-stretch heavyweight interfacing that is fusible. Lots of different moving parts, right? But it's really important to learn the differences. Now, I'm also going to link you all to an article from the Sewing Directory, which talks all about interfacing. This is a heavyweight interfacing. It has a little bit less movement than the fusible one I was holding up before. And this is also something you could use for suit jackets if you wanted to sew it in rather than fuse it in. You know, this would be great for the cuffs or a collar on a jacket. If you want to give the front or the back of your jacket a little bit more structure, this is also a really nice option. Let's say you found this beautiful lightweight cashmere fabric and it just feels delicious, but you actually want that jacket to have a little bit more structure than the fabric's going to give it. This would be an amazing option to buffer up the inside of your jacket so that you still have that beautiful soft cashmere. You're going to give it a little bit of structure and a little bit of extra warmth before you line it. You can also line and interface your jackets if you need something super warm. A really thin quilting batting can be used as a really great interfacing for jackets, or a thick one. Go full hog, my friends. If you want a super warm, really thick plush jacket, a really great batting, quilting batting is going to be amazing for that. Let's talk about a woven non-fusible interfacing. So this is the interfacing. Sorry if I keep on hitting my microphone, guys. This is the interfacing I keep around to do bodices for bridal gowns or corsetry and that kind of thing. Now, it is a non-fusible sew-in woven interfacing. And this I bought from Silk and Stitch. If you are looking for formal wear fabrics, bridal fabrics, Silk and Stitch is an amazing option for that. I absolutely love them. I've bought so much from them now. See my orders come in and go, oh, it's Jenny again. Really lovely team, amazing customer service. I bought this from them and I'm pretty sure I got about 5 or 10 meters of it, but I use it a lot. I make a lot of corsetry. I make a lot of formal wear. And you can tell this is a very stiff fabric. You know, it's going to give things like your corsetry a lot of structure. Now, why would we want too much structure? Look at it. Ugh, I can literally hold it upright. This kind of fabric like a beautiful satin on the outside of your corset are a much more delicate fabric. So your interfacing that you're putting underneath that beautiful delicate fabric is designed to protect that fashion fabric so that your garments will last longer. Now, where have I put it? I have too much fabric. 100% I have way too much fabric. Let's say, no, that piece is too big and I don't want to unravel it. And back we go to the I have too much fabric to find the piece. Here we go. Find the piece of fabric I'm looking for. So, I have this absolutely gorgeous satin that I bought from Super Cheap Fabrics years and years ago. Unfortunately, this gorgeous fabric is no longer available. How beautiful would this look as a corset or a bodice on an evening gown? Look at that gorgeous drape. Now, we all know that's not going to hold up itself as the outside fabric on a corset. But we put a bit of interface in it. You can instantly, even just holding that underneath it, gives it a lot more structure. Look. Even with it not sewn in, all of a sudden we've got a lovely bit of structure for this cotton or for this satin. We're over here, and look, I'm holding it with just one finger on either side. Structure, no structure. So you want to protect full and even just beautifully woven cottons, your intricate embroidered fabrics. Put some interfacing underneath it. You're going to protect the structure of that fabric, and all of the tension in the garment is going to go to the interfacing and the lining instead. Now, I can talk all day long about how to put structure in corsetry to make it last longer. That's a different video. We will have that video, I promise you. And we will have that live session so that you can ask all your questions at the same time. So that gives you some idea of the basics and where to start with interfacing and what it's all about. And you can very clearly see structure-wise what it actually does when you put it under a piece of fabric. Now, interfacing does come in some different colors. Usually you can get it in black, white, or neutral. Sounds super annoying, right? Well, the easiest answer I can give you there is use black interfacing if you can find it under darker fabrics. Use white interfacing under lighter fabrics, and use neutral interfacing under either. Now, you can't get black interfacing and you have a darker fabric you're working with, that's all right. You can use a white interfacing, it's not a problem. But I definitely would not use a black or a darker interfacing under a white fabric or a really light colored fabric. Like, I mean, if you have a dark interfacing and you put it under something like this, I mean, we instantly can see, you can see the color, the pattern of my pants through the bottom layers of this. So your interfacing is something that I just want you to go out and try. Bit of trial and error. Make sure that you are reading your pattern instructions. Most independent pattern designers, if the instructions for whatever reason don't make it entirely clear to you what kind of interfacing should you be using, contact them. Most of them have contact me pages where you can send them an email and say, hey, I'm making this particular top. It calls for some interfacing. Should I buy sew-on or fusible? What kind of interfacing would you recommend when I'm using this type of fabric to make your garment? They will help you. Indie pattern designers are way more accessible for that kind of help than you're ever going to get from one of the big 4 patterns, which is another reason I'm a massive proponent for using your indie pattern designers. Another thing that I wanted to touch on that sort of falls into the interfacing world are things like horsehair braid and Vlysafix. Now, Vlysafix is a whole other bucket of fun. If you've ever seen applique, Vlysafix is probably what they've used to put those applique bits on. So it comes in a roll of paper like this, and it's this super thin, super sheer fabric, which has adhesive on both sides. So you can cut out little itty bits of, you know, you can cut out flowers or a little design from a kitty fabric or anything that you want to attach to another piece of fabric. You can use Vlysafix to applique it on, and then you've got the option of using a satin stitch on your sewing machine or a zigzag stitch to go all the way around the edge just to fix it down. Or you can put glitter glue around the outside. I used to do that all the time when I was a kid. I'd like cut a flower out from a piece of fabric, stitch it on a t-shirt, and then, or Vlysafix it onto a t-shirt, and then get some glitter glue and go around the outside and just finish the outside off. Really good way to get your kids crafting with you, doing a bit of applique and just finishing the outside off with some glitter glue. Really good to do on things like totes. So if you've got a little canvas tote bag that you've made or something like that, or you're having a craft day with a bunch of people who are really, really new to sewing and craft, grab a bit of Vlysafix, put it on some fun fabrics with big patterns, get them to cut out a design, and then you iron it. So you cut it out with the paper, you put the paper over the part, like, so you put, all right, let me show you a bit more clearly what I'm talking about. So you would cut a piece off, right? You keep your paper, you put this down on the fabric and you iron on the paper. Please, please, please do not remove the paper and try and iron it down. You will adhere your Vlysafix to your iron. That is not what we want to do. It is adhesive on both sides, as I mentioned before. Just to give you an indication of where this would sit on the interfacing scale, Vlysafix is a non-woven, non-knit interfacing, which is iron on both sides. Okay, have a lot of fun with this stuff. It is not cheap, but it is definitely fun and it is great for applique. Now, horsehair braid. This is popular in the last 4 or 5 years, where we see formal gowns with that wavy band around the bottom. This is what it is. Now, this is quite a thin horsehair braid. It's basically a netting, so a small strip of netting, which does move a little bit. You can get woven and non-woven for this as well. Ones that sort of stretch a bit more than others, and you use it to give the bottom of a skirt a little bit more structure. Now, I also, when I'm making corsetry, will sometimes use a little bit of horsehair braid in the back panel where the eyelets are going to be to do your corset up. I'll sometimes use a little bit of this in there as well, or I just double my layer of interfacing at the back. So you can use this anywhere that you need a garment to have a little bit more structure. When I've been out of interfacing, I've actually used horsehair braid in an emergency to do a waistband. I probably wouldn't recommend that. It's like, you can do it. It's going to give you heaps of structure. It's not really what it's meant for. This is meant for giving the bottom of garments a bit more structure. So if you've got some pants, like I love these pants. these look like a skirt, but they're actually a big pair of palazzo pants, and they're from Style Arc. I love this pattern. I bought it recently. It's got a really cool pocket style to it. So I'll link that below as well. I need to write a list while I'm doing this of everything I promised you I'm going to link below, because half the time I forget. Thank you, ADHD brain. So I'm putting this back in the wrong basket. We're just going to really quickly put this away before I forget. There we go. And now I've forgotten what I was saying. That's great, isn't it? Do a bit of research. You know, when... that's what I was saying. I need to... See what I mean? I forget stuff as I'm chatting all the time. Basically, when it comes to your interfacing and remembering things, write stuff down as you're going. Really good go and find some yoga pants or some really great knit material that you want to make yoga pants. Buy some power mesh. I should show you what power mesh is. I'm going to go into the other room real quick and grab my bucket of power mesh. You guys are still going to be able to hear me. They have offcuts that you can buy, and I have this big bucket of various different power meshes. So this is power mesh. This is what we would consider a stretch interfacing. You can see it moves quite nicely in both directions. Now, this is what we use to give a bit of structure to swimwear. By the way, power mesh is one of those interfacings that does come in many, many different colors. So yoga pants, activewear, power, swimwear, anything a little bit stretchy that needs some extra structure, power mesh is probably going to be your go-to interfacing for that. You can get iron-on knit interfacings. I don't really like them. Personal preference there. I just find that power mesh does what I want it to do. And apparently I have a nice little bag in my box of power mesh. That's nice. I would definitely investigate power mesh before you look at other types of knit interfacing, because I find this much easier to use and gives you a much nicer finish. But like I said, personal preference. Go try a bunch of different things, see what you like, see what floats your boat. I'm going to go back to my notes to make sure I haven't missed anything. How do we apply fusible interfacing? Okay, well, I want you to test your fusible interfacing out before you put it on any of your cut pieces of fashion fabric, okay? So a fusible, as I mentioned to you, I got a bit cocky. I did my fusible interfacing on my beautiful silk and have caused myself some ripples on the inside of my bag. Now, no one's seeing this other than me, and you now as well, and the rest of the internet when they watch this video. And you can see I didn't put it on the outside, which has meant that the outside of the bag just has the lovely lines of fabric and it doesn't have that fusible ripple. So that is why we always want to be testing out our fusible interfacing. Go for a lower temperature before a higher temperature. I'm going to close my door because I can hear Rod again. There we go. Make sure you are ironing at a lower temperature than you think you will need to. I want you to do your iron temperature based on the fabric you are using and take it back one step. So most of us have irons, just like this one. that has things like, some of them will just say, I know it's hard to see, but this dial sometimes will say things like cotton, linen, silk, wool, that kind of thing. If you've got one of those irons, go for the fabric that you're doing, turn it back a step, just to keep your temperature a little bit lower. Now, if you've got one like this one that just says 1 dot, 2 dot, 3 dot max, you might need to do a little bit of Googling to find out what sort of temperature should you be ironing your fabric on. Now, what I'm going to say is that natural fibers will generally take a higher heat than your synthetic fibers like a polyester or a nylon or something like that. That being said, always go a little bit lower than you think you need to with things like silk, because silk is a delicate little darling that sometimes you can iron it on a relatively high temperature and it's fine. Sometimes you'll iron it on a relatively high temperature and it just burns in 5 seconds flat. So test your silk, test your ironing before you get anywhere near your fashion fabrics that are cut out ready for you to use to make your pattern, or you will cry. So just really test it out. What you want to do with your fusible interfacings is you would grab your fusible interfacing and you would grab your fabric that you're going to adhere it to, flip it over, you put your fusible interfacing glue side down, double check it, glue side down. Can you see any shiny bits? No, it's probably glue side down. Just feel it. Does it feel bumpy? No. Okay, it's probably glue side down. I know I'm harping on this. The number of times that I have accidentally attached interfacing to my iron and then had to peel it off and clean my iron before I could do anything else. Super annoying. Please, 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 please double check. Hello, Fluff. We have Assistant Fluff come to help us. I'm very glad this iron's off. So, sir, I need that. I know that you think it's a cushion, but I need that. Come on, please back up. Thank you, sir. No, over there. Thank you. Good boy. So, Fluff, can you get your butt out of the live stream? Just sit down. No. Yeah, okay, you can sit there. That's fine. So we would then... Come on, dude. Give me a break. Give me a little break. All right, so I then want you to grab a piece of cotton, or if you have a fluff who can hold your fabric down for you as well, that's always a great option. Please don't iron your cat. Ironing your cat can cause severe burning and very large vet bills, and they don't like it very much, so I would not recommend. Fluff, I'm going to have to get you off the table, my love. Come on. I know. Life's very hard. Down you go. Good boy. Okay, so you can get a Raja cloth, which is an ironing cloth, or you can just grab a piece of cotton, put it on the top of what you're ironing and iron slowly. Generally with interfacing, you want to just put your iron down, leave it for 10 to 15 seconds, pick it back up again, put your iron back down. Now, if you have a heat press, because you do sublimation printing or vinyl transfers or that kind of thing, a heat press can be really, really great for doing your iron-on interfacing, because it's a big surface area that doesn't have loads of little holes like an iron. Utilize the tools you have. If you don't have a heat press, just use your iron. It's fine. It is fine. Once you've put it down, leave it for 5 to 10 seconds, give it a little wiggle, just to make sure where the holes are in your iron, you're not getting some bubbles. Turn your iron around. Go back the other way. Hold it still. Little wiggle without too much pressure, just to make sure that where the holes are in your iron, that you are not missing the fusible interfacing. I know I've said this many times. I'm going to say it again. Please, please, please test your fusible interfacing on your fabric before you get cavalier like me. Go ahead and ruin your silk lining, because it's going to cost you a lot more money to go ahead and start interfacing onto something with just enough fabric that you've just cut out all your bits and pieces and all of a sudden realize, oh crap, that fusible interfacing is not fusing properly onto my fabric. If you're familiar with the temperature it needs, how long you need to leave it on there, you're going to get a much, much better result, and that comes through practice. So lightweight fabrics, lighter temperature, heavier weight fabrics, slightly higher temperature, you can probably go, like I said, err on the side of caution. A little less heat than you would normally use is probably a better option when it comes to iron-on interfacing, and just take your time. Do it slowly. See, this is why I like using a sewing interfacing 90% of the time, because I actually think a sewing interfacing most of the time is faster. Once you stand there and slowly iron everything, see where I'm coming from, right? Another good thing about a heat press, if you do have one, is that your heat press can allow you to select the temperature, and you can also Google with just what temperature should I iron this type of interfacing onto my fabric with, and you will find loads of different articles out there that will show you either this particular temperature or this setting on your iron to help guide you while you're learning how to use interfacing about what's the right thing to do there. So again, the article from Sewing Directory UK, I'm going to link that for you because that gives you some really, really good tips about how to use a fusible interfacing. Obviously with your iron-on interface, here we go. With your sew-in interfacings, what you are going to find is that obviously you cut it out. You can just lay it under the bits of fabric that you're cutting and cut it at the same time, or you can cut it separately and then you literally just go and, it's called flatlining. You flatline it to all the pieces that you're interfacing by taking both pieces and just sewing it in with your sewing machine. Now, what if you're making something, you're making it in a hurry and you've realized, oh crap, I don't have any interfacing and I need to interface the band of that skirt that I'm making. No problem. Do you know what's a really good fix, especially if you're happy to do a sew-on interfacing? Cotton poplin. Cotton poplin is my go-to. I've run out of interfacing, which I'm pretty sure you can tell doesn't happen very often. Oh my God, I've run out of interfacing. I'm going to need to give something a bit more structure. Cotton poplin, cotton drill, any kind of fabric that's going to add a little bit of extra structure and extra heft to what you are making will work in a pinch. And even not even in a pinch, we haven't had interfacing for years and years and years. When people were making corsetry before, they didn't go down to Spotlight and grab some iron-on interfacing to interface the lining of their corset back in 1880. Hello, Moo Moo. We have all the cats today, apparently. They grabbed a bit of calico, they attached it or they flatlined it to their fashion fabric, and then they used that to make their nice heavy corsetry along with a good sturdy cotton coutil. Moo Moo? Excuse me, ma'am. No. No, 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 no. We don't jump in my wardrobe. No. No, no, no. That is not a Moo Moo shelf. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, dealing with my cats in my craft room. This happens all the time when I'm sewing. So, interfacing is a relatively new invention. In the past, our ancestors were not sewing with iron-on, non-woven interfacing. They were using cotton, they were using calico, they were using a bit of scrap linen. They were doubling up the fabric they were using to give that piece of the garment a little bit more heft. When we look at wool coats and things in the past, they were quite often lined with a calico or some more cotton or just an extra piece of the fabric that they were using. So get creative. You do not have to go out and spend heaps and heaps and heaps of money to buy a whole bunch of different types of interfacing like I have. Most people don't need this many different types of interfacing. It is only because I make so much corsetry, wedding dresses, costumes, things for other people that I have so many different options, and because I know about interfacing from having used it for so many years. So definitely make sure that you're reading your instructions. Don't panic. Cotton is always a good alternative. If you need a stretch interfacing and you don't have any power mesh or another type of stretch interfacing, double up the piece of fabric you're using. If you're making some swimwear and it says, oh, you're going to need a power mesh in the bodice to keep your boobs up, really great trick. Double up your fashion fabric, or if you've got some other lycra sitting around at home, grab a piece of lycra, even an extra bit of cotton lycra underneath will give your swimwear a little bit more structure. Making some yoga pants and it says, oh, you need some power mesh in the waistband to keep it up. You don't have any power mesh, grab a bit of cotton lycra, put it in your waistband, it'll do. Especially if you're just learning, this is your first time, you don't want to go invest a whole stack of money on power mesh. Is expensive. I mean, if you want some power mesh cheap, definitely go to order from Silk and Stitch. Their offcuts bag. Now, I want to show you something. This is an offcut from Silk and Stitch. That's an offcut. That's so much fabric. That will easily make you a waistband for a couple of different pairs of yoga pants. Even for me and my chunky butt, that'll work. You know what's really nice? You know those yoga pants that have like your nude section down the side? It's power mesh. Or, a lot of the time it's power mesh. Sometimes it's a stretch mesh. Power mesh has a little bit more structure than a stretch mesh. I prefer to use a power. This is dyeable. So if you only have a white power mesh and you're making a black garment, go get yourself some RIT dye. RIT does synthetic dyes that work absolutely brilliantly, and dye it to match your fabric. They also have a really awesome chart on their website so that you can go and color match the fabric to the color you want it to be, and it tells you exactly what proportions of which dyes you need to use to get it the color you want it to be. And you know what? If you're worried about it not quite matching, go for a contrast. You're making some really lovely blue yoga pants. Cool. Do a strip down the side in a pale blue, or do a strip down the side in a white or a yellow, or something that makes you happy. Explore and do things in a way that are going to bring you joy. But yeah, back to the interfacing topic we're talking about. I want you to really go out there and experiment. Definitely make yourself a bag so you can see how interfacing is going to sit against the garment or sit against the fabric, so you can see the kind of structure it gives. Make yourself a bodice that has a collar. Collars well, you should interface most collars, and if you don't want to go out and invest in some interfacing and you're making a collared blouse, great. Grab a little bit of cotton poplin, cut out your fashion and your lining fabric, and then cut out a piece of this as well. Attach it to your lining fabric and then sew it together as normal, and you will automatically see the difference. Do an experiment. I want you to go and make a garment with a collar or a cuff, and I want you to make the collar twice. Make it once with interfacing or an extra structure in there, and make it once with just your fashion fabric and your lining, and then pin it to the rest of the shirt that you've made, and look at how they sit, and you will instantly see the difference between something that has been interfaced and something that hasn't. Another one that people don't often think of is when we're making strappy tops or dresses, and not spaghetti straps. Spaghetti straps are a whole different topic. But we're making a strap that's maybe a centimetre wide, and you're not making it with a slider or anything to be adjustable. You just want that strap to give your dress a little bit of heft. Cut out something like a piece of cotton like this. Let's say you're making a garment in a beautiful satin and you want to have matching satin straps, but you need those straps to have a little bit more structure. You don't want them to bend. You know, you're making them just wide enough to sit over your bra strap so that you can hide your bra strap. Put a single layer of interfacing in there. So if you've got a strap, you want it to be, say, 1 inch wide and you've cut 2 inches of fabric, and you're going to fold it over. And, well, let's say you cut 2.5 inches because you're going to give yourself a little bit of extra room for your seam allowance, because we remember seam allowances. Cut out a piece of cotton, half the size that you want the strap to be. Fold it over when you're sewing, and then when you pull it through, you're going to find that that strap has just enough extra structure from a little bit of lightweight cotton that it'll make all the difference, and all of a sudden your garments are going to start looking a lot more professional. They're going to look like that you've put a bit of thought into what you're doing. People are going to start saying, "Oh, where did you get that dress? It's gorgeous." And then you get the pride of smiling and saying, "Oh, thank you, I made it." And this is one of these things that when we're first learning, quite often people go, "Oh, do I actually need to interface that?" Yeah, you do. Trust me, you want to. Unless you're quite experienced and you're making something that you know interfacing that garment for what you're wanting to do is not actually the result you're looking for, okay, you're welcome to skip the interfacing at that point. But while you are learning sewing and what to do, I really want you to experiment with interfacing. Experiment with sewing interfacing as well as iron-on. I actually think sewing interfacing is the more beginner-friendly version, not iron-on, despite the fact that everybody wants you to think it's the other way around. I hope you have a lot of fun with your experimenting. If you do have any questions, please, I'm going to be reposting this video onto YouTube once we're done. Make sure that you ask your questions there. You can ask on Instagram. You can email me. My details are always on the channel. You can jump on Facebook and ask on Facebook. I'm always happy to get questions from people. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I just realized that I probably haven't seen any messages from live chat because this was, if anyone said hi, hello. Apologies if I have missed any of your chats. For some reason, it doesn't seem to be populating today. And yeah, we're going to pop this up. I will put all the links that are needed to make sure that you've got all the resources you need. And I hope you all have a really fantastic weekend.